The following transmission is a conversation with Preston Hardin, lead writer and creator of the True Vault Escapades, a Fallout audio drama. The story follows the adventures of a grizzled detective and his vault-born partner in crime as they explore and solve the wasteland's biggest mysteries, set in a penny comic detective-style adventure set against the events of the still unfolding lead-up to the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. Over the course of our conversation, we'll talk about the style in which the story is presented, audio dramas, how Preston approaches tone and storytelling, and what the future has in store for Walter, Bunny, and their crime-solving adventures. I am follower Toshi, and this is the Atomcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow for future episodes, and consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to new uploads to help keep episodes ad-free and to improve the quality and frequency of transmission. As always, links to our Patreon, as well as guest socials, can be found in the description, and be sure to leave a comment recommending creators that you'd like to see as future guests. Without further ado, Preston Hardin.
So before diving into specifically details of the story of True Vault Escapades, let's walk back a little bit, not a lot of it, but a little bit, because one of the interesting things that I've noticed about your podcast specifically, as it relates to other podcasts in the Fallout community, is that you seem to lean a lot more into the noir aesthetic, which is both it is and it is not an aesthetic utilized in the Fallout franchise. I would argue to the point that it does, because there's characters like Silver Shroud and the Mysterious Stranger and various story beats and elements that harken back to the noir style of filmmaking and older detective movies, but at the same time it doesn't, because it's sort of paved over by the whole old world blues aesthetic and the 1950s Americana that the series is more so leaned into. But when it comes to your story, I see a bit more of that. To what degree is that sort of narrative tone present in your stories, and what specifically from the Fallout franchise sort of inspired the stories you tell that are now wrapped in this trench coat and fedora?
It's funny because Fallout sent me down this pipeline of old world media, just like other games similar, like BioShock, LA Noire, and the Mafia series. Fallout more so. I distinctly fell in love with Galaxy News Radio from Fallout 3, which was my first Fallout, and they would sometimes play Herbert Daring Dashwood and his stalwart ghoul manservant Arga. And when you pair that with the music and the kind of retro futuristic Art Deco vibe of the game, it started making me want more, basically. And so that's when I started pursuing, anything from TCM, watching classic black and white movies, to watching actual old world Fallout Shelter advertisements. And one of those things that it pipelined me into was radio shows, so actual radio shows. And one particular radio show is what inspired True Vault Escapades, and that was Nick Carter, Master Detective, which ran for, I believe, a little over 10 years. And I listened to the whole series back to front, and that's sort of what helped spark the show. And the reason being I wanted it to be in Fallout is because I knew the lore so well. So it's why not just incorporate this brand new story into Fallout with the whole 1940s aspects, and it would work so well because it would sound like something that you would hear play on Fallout radio station. So that's technically why I lean real heavy into the whole noir detective monologue thing, because it's technically not Fallout in the post-war sense, but so much of that pre-war world is so present in each of the Fallout games that I just felt like including that kind of 50s aesthetic totally would still work, even though it's in a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
For our audiences who may not be as familiar with it, go a little bit deeper into what Nick Carter specifically is and why he was such a why it was such a standout story for you.
For Nick Carter, it was kind of luck of the draw on Nick Carter. I just kind of typed in like 1940s radio show, and that happened to be the first one that came up, and so I indulged in that. And in fact, you'll hear in a lot of the earlier episodes almost like completely direct inspiration from that show. I almost modeled the show after Nick Carter when it comes to Walter, Bunny, and Humphreys, who's the NCR lieutenant that helps them on cases, because Nick Carter is the main cast of Nick Carter is Nick, the detective, Patsy, his secretary, and sometimes damsel in distress, and then you have Lieutenant Riley, who was their like cop connection. And when you listen to it, it has all of the ingredients you would imagine in the most like stereotypical detective show. It's got the crime, the bad sound effects, the fast talking and the voices, but it's the same formula as any show like Dragnet or something like that. It's like a crime happens, Nick gets it, Patsy helps him. They drive around town, get into trouble, and sometimes it ends on like it's about to end on like a really bad cliffhanger or like a dire situation. But then Nick comes up with something last moment and saves the day. And so that's kind of, at least now, at least in the beginning, actually, that's kind of how the episodes were modeled. Because that's kind of all I knew. I didn't really know any other radio shows until a little bit later. And so all I did was kind of make my own version of Nick Carter in a way, but then just give it a Fallout blanket, which is kind of what it started out. It's become more of its own thing now, but yeah, it's probably the most stereotypical radio show you can hear. Nick Carter. It's exactly how you imagine it.
Which, I mean, like, especially in a Fallout sense, because we were talking about this briefly before we started the interview. The medium specifically, because we've had numerous people on the podcast before that do radio dramas and just like radio style content, like in general. Robot Radio, Kenneth Vigu from the Chad Fallout 76 story, Once Upon a Wasteland, but the medium itself, these sort of like radio dramas, they fit so well not only into like specifically like the narrative, because like the stories that get told in these radio dramas are, you know, Fallout inspired. So obviously the people that make them want them to feel believable in the universe, if not in specific instances like Once Upon a Wasteland, to sort of intertwine with the canon story of the game in so many words. But when it comes to the actual medium itself, the way that the stories are being transmitted via a radio drama over audio, it's literally just radio, which is such a big deal in the Fallout universe, as both a, maybe not as much like a lore thing specifically, but more so in like the post-apocalypse, like how important radio is. We saw radio communication be, I can't remember the name of the mission, but I remember very distinctly a mission in New Vegas where you had to like go around and reactivate, like help get the
NCR. Yeah, the ranger stations.
Get them set back up so they can communicate and stuff. And then in Fallout Prime, recently, the second season, it's been like 2 months at this point since that episode wrapped up. So sorry, spoilers. Radio frequency is very important in the second season. It's how Norm tries to reach out to his dad and Lucy. It's how Hank communicates with the Enclave in a sense. It's how Thaddeus in the first season got a hold of the Brotherhood of Steel, this, that, and the other thing. They're leaning more into it, and it's so very interesting to be able to see people be creative using these already uniquely creative mediums to make lore-friendly stories while doing it through a lore-friendly medium.
It's almost like a positive paradox. Like it works in two different ways. Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because one of the most common questions I get is like, is Walter and Bunny, is True Vault Escapades supposed to be in world, like stories just being told in world, or is this like supposed to be a troupe of actors that are just broadcasting over people's Pit Boys and stuff? And what's funny is, for me, I tried, at least I do, I try to make it work in and around the lore as best as possible, just on the off chance that it could possibly work in game or in universe someday. So I do not interject my characters into what is going on in the timeline of New Vegas, which is where True Vault Escapades is set. Like, I will meticulously scope out little things that aren't really touched upon in the Fallout universe that perhaps Walter and Bunny can go and investigate. So, for instance, we had one about La Fantoma in the case of the Sunken Orchid. It's the skill magazine from Fallout New Vegas that gets you sneak. And I looked it up. There's no lore, no backstory about it. It's just a skill magazine that exists. And so what I did was I had Walter and Bunny actually investigate the mysterious death of its creator a day before the bombs dropped. And it just becomes this massive web of lies and deceit. And it kind of gives life to this otherwise like lifeless thing in game. And there's plenty more examples of that. So in my mind in particular, I think that Walter and Bunny exist. I don't try to make them like actors in game or in universe, and it's just a play for Wastelanders to hear. I like to imagine that they do walk amongst the NPCs and people like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the like you mentioned earlier, Daring Dashwood and Argyle. Like I think that might have been, if I'm remembering the lore correctly, that was like embellished a little bit for the drama of radio, but I think that was very much the same. Like it was based on like their adventures and whatnot.
Right. Herbert, I believe Herbert tells you that it's actors portraying their past stories, which of course, I mean, despite the embellishments, makes their stories more or less real. In this case, I imagine it as literally it's just them, almost like a camera's following the detectives around as they're doing in lore things.
Yeah, kind of like,
but it works.
Yeah, kind of like those true crime podcasts where it's like retelling like actual events that happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think because like you were asking, like, are the characters in the story like are they real, or are they being like characters that are being played by actors and stuff? It's funny because like I think like for like the briefest second I misunderstood the question, and I thought that the question that was being asked was are they like like real, are these stories of like real people, or are they sort of like dime comic series, like the story of True Vault Escapades isn't like it's not like a play that's being put on by Wastelanders or like a radio broadcast. It's like a pre-war comic book series that's being told in like the Fallout universe. And I thought like, oh man, that's like that extra layer of deep deep like meta level, like because you were talking about like La Fantoma, like somebody made a podcast of a story based off of the La Fantoma comic book that in canon, not canon, but like in canon, exists. We just don't see it because the story itself is not canon. It's a podcast series. Man, I just kind of monster mashed my way in there for a second. That was like,
it's like explaining the multiverse theory. It's like a world within a world within a world.
right? Like the song, the Monster Mash, is based on a song called the Monster Mash, which is based on a dance called the Monster Mash, which is not based on the song called the Monster Mash. And
Monster
like,
Mash. Yeah. Yeah, RPGs can be kind of weird, or imaginary universes. I mean, I like to leave it up to some folks' interpretation, but I like to pretend that like maybe someday Bethesda or somebody would like notice it, for instance, and be like, "Hey, they did not trample over something we had already built. They made it to where they're kind of out of bounds, but still involved in some way. So like maybe we can." Put them in the background or like a Wild Wasteland perk NPCs that like run past your screen real quick.
yeah, that'd be great. So to like, you know, to build into all that, the meat and potatoes here. What is the story of True Vault Escapades in like the macro sense?
Oh boy. Well, what's so funny is, and just to provide a slight bit of backstory, I for about 10 years ran a web station called A Bomb Radio. It used to be called Old World Tunes. And it was a Fallout inspired station, and it played oldies from Fallout 24/7. And I wanted to kind of have my own Herbert Daring Dashwood show. And that's when True Vault Escapades came into play. It started with 5 episodes about a detective who's down on his luck in the town of Carbon, Texas, which is featured in Brotherhood of Steel, the game. And a mysterious vault girl approaches him with a 10,000 cap reward to solve the social experiment of Vault 54. And when he takes that job, they travel there. And once they get there, this just crazy series of espionage and back alley murders tied to like the overseer and a bunch of like top officials unfolds, and they have to figure out who's lying, who's not, only to discover that the Enclave is behind it. Spoiler alert, but there's way more to the story than just that. I was initially going to just have it be 5 episodes on rotation and just leave it there. But as time went by, I was like, I think I could see this going a bit further, and it doesn't have to be just one continuous story. Why can't it be like the case of this, the case of that, and every new episode's a new story? So I came up with this way to continue it because, again, spoiler alert: Walter and Bunny are separated at the end of the first 5 episodes. Walter basically helps save the vault. He leaves, and the door closes for good with Bunny still inside of it. Well, we figure out later that it turns out that Vault 54 was secretly in charge of producing basically an indestructible vehicle that ran on fission power, nuclear, everything. It's basically plated in power armor, and it was meant to be perfected and then mass produced to the Enclave once it was perfected, and they would basically make fleets of them and vehicles like it and take over the wasteland. Well, something happened, and Bunny escapes with another vault dweller out of the vault with that car. When she discovers the truth, Walter chases her down, and she happens to be in New Vegas, where they open when they meet, they open a detective agency and use that car to their advantage. And they basically get deputized by Mr. House himself, and they solve a myriad of cases together. And that's more or less the meat and potatoes of the show. But there is still a looming threat of the Enclave coming to get them, but they think they're safe. And that's kind of where we're at right now in the series.
I guess to sort of like build on that, in and of itself, because like, I mean, you definitely know this from how long you've been working on this project and stuff, but like the story of any sort of narrative isn't just the narrative; it's also the tonal expression, the the messaging, the vibe, all the you know,
Mhm.
feelings based bits and pieces that go into making a story more than just, you know, a story and turning it into something that, to say memorable is to imply that it's not already memorable, but you know what I mean? Something that stands out because it strikes at a certain emotional chord.
Yeah.
When it comes to the emotional story, or the tonal story of True Vault Escapades, what are you trying to accomplish, or what are you building with that specifically?
Well, it's funny because the initial mission of True Vault Escapades was to make the most authentic sounding kind of reproduction of a 40s radio drama as possible. It was pivoted more that way just to not sound like we were trying to mimic something, but actually sounded like we came from that time period. But as the show has progressed, and for those who have listened, you've probably seen the progression. How we've kind of done we did it. So I decided to move on with more of a emotional side of things. So instead of just the stereotypical radio detective guy and his girl Friday solving a case, and then they solve another one, and vice, and etc. I started to bring about much more like deep and emotional and much more natural sounding stories that I've even had some folks say like, oh, like my eyes started to well up on this episode and that episode. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's working. But we we are now at a point where it's like, okay, the old radio thing is established. Now let's start to like get into the more gritty, realistic wasteland stories that we are used to in Fallout, and just have our detectives insert themselves in that. And then from that, it becomes way more like raw and emotional and real. And that's kind of where we're at now. We went from like a slightly more cheesy radio drama, and now we're more like Dragnet, which is a lot darker and more realistic, with like way more realistic subject matter. And it's resonated with a lot of folks, and I'm glad it has. And we can still do that and maintain the old music, the detective monologues, all the smoking and suits and hats. We still keep that going, all the while pivoting the tonnage of the show.
Yeah, because I forget what it is. I think it's the difference between horror and comedy is literally just like the tone, or like the
Yeah.
delivery or something like that. Because that's one of the things I notice like all the time. And like, you know, I'll be like, you know, God, I can't remember his name, but there's this one guy on TikTok who makes these really fun, really creative, really well done short horror segments.
Well, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yes.
he's usually like walking around his house, and they'll like something. Yeah, he'll just stand. It's really quiet like all the time, and he does like jump scares, but he doesn't do like, you know, the Five Nights at Freddy jump scares where it like jumps out and screams at you. It's just kind of like
something staring at you.
yeah, like there's all of a sudden something. I remember seeing a TikTok that was like, it was basically he took one of his videos and then like put like silly music or something over it, and then like, oh, this isn't that scary, and it's like, oh wow, crazy how when you play funny music, all of a sudden the video is funny. All of a sudden, all the tone and all the presence just like
changes the
pulled
whole
out.
thing.
It's ridiculous. I mean, not in the sense of like, oh well, duh, but it's like, yeah, there's when it comes to like comedic stuff, especially, or stuff that's supposed to be like, you know, a little bit cheesy, a little bit hammy, a little bit humorous in a sense. It's so easy to then pivot into something like more serious. I think that's part of why it's sort of, I mean, like it works in a lot of places, but I can just off the top of my head, I can see it working a lot in like, you know, obviously like it's kind of a case by case basis, but you see Japanese like anime and manga do the same thing where like a lot of it will be like, you know, funny, campy, and then like it'll all of a sudden, maybe not all of a sudden, but like it is able to transition into like heavier tonal subjects, which I think is really interesting. And I think especially in a radio drama, that works really well, because the thing you're relying most on in the radio drama is like, you know, character delivery and like the narration itself. And it's easy to sort of mold both of those things into, you know, humor or seriousness, just depending on like I said before, literally just like tonal indicators like music or narration.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing with the show, and I think it's just a matter of what generation is listening to my show. I will literally take, for instance, music, or I used to at least. I used to take music from like 1940s, 1950s movie trailers with those big band, just dramatic to the core style music, and I would use that just religiously on the show just to keep a vibe going of that old time radio. And it's funny because, you know, we'll have something really sad and dramatic happen, but when they hear that classic music, I think sometimes it kind of brings an unseriousness to it, to like people who aren't like used to that style of music and that style of media. But even then, though, the the older episodes, you'll see such a stark contrast in that tone. Like I said, it's one of the old episodes are definitely going to be more like on that stereotypical side, despite the story that's being told, which is great. It's just you can clearly, at least I can clearly tell that I am trying to be the best mimic as possible. But then when you get to these newer episodes, not only has the music and had gotten serious, more serious rather, it's just like the acting has gotten more realistic. It's like we switched from 30s acting to 70s acting. There's such a stark contrast in that, because that subject matter has shifted, and not in a super dramatic fashion, but you know, I'll pull a Game of Thrones on you one day. Somebody might die that you never expected to die, and it'll leave you floored. I would have never done that before.
In like
and
a
then it's
really
like, oh, this
bad
just got
way
serious.
too. Like it won't be a good death; it'll be a bad death.
Yeah, it'll be real bad. Sometimes we'll introduce a character and they get like torn to shreds by a super mutant, and I have really fleshed out this character, and everybody's like, oh, I could totally see this person coming back for another episode. And I'm like, so,
like, no,
so
they're dead.
things like that will happen, and I wouldn't have done that in the past.
So as far as like the narrative specifically, I think it's interesting because you talked about how you talked about how this was something that you started working on, or maybe not started working on, but were like inspired to like further develop because of the Herbert Daring Dashwood radio dramas from Fallout 3. And then, you know, you the actual bulk of the story is set in New Vegas. And so, you know, we see this like evolution along with the timeline. This could be a personal opinion on my front, and you can speak to it. I feel as if Fallout 4 specifically leaned a lot harder into the sort of like, you know, noir detective kind of shtick with, obviously, you know, with Nick Valentine, but then also characters like the Silver Shroud and the missions that he's attached to. Funnily enough, with the guy on the radio who's hyping up the Silver Shroud and talking about his live and ongoing adventures. And let's see, there was another one like off the top of my head. Obviously, you know, you get into Far Harbor. That's very sort of like noir coded in a sense. Especially the whole like, you know, foggy docks at midnight sort of setting. But to that point, I feel as if Fallout 4 is very sort of like, noir coded and stuff like that. As these games come out and as the franchise has developed, especially into Fallout 4, how has I guess more so specifically for Fallout 4, how has that sort of like inspired and helped to like shape and evolve the story, if it has had any sort of impact on the way that you specifically are designing the story of the True Vault Escapades?
Well, it's funny you say that because True Vault Escapades was my brainchild in 2014, and I was wanting to release it in 2015 before Fallout 4 came out to just kind of get on the hype train with it. I thought it'd be a perfect time, but since I didn't really know what I was doing, it didn't release until 2016. But that being said, I had all Fallout 4 and really just 4 and 76, just this new generation, introduced like a lot of different subject matter that I could explore. Like, for instance, we have a 2017 episode called The Case of the Mannequin Soldier, which is kind of like, since I'm in New Vegas, I'm kind of landlocked to certain things that I can really deal with in other Fallout games at different locations, but I can kind of bring pieces of it into the Mojave. And so in this case, like the Mannequin Soldier, it deals with the Institute and synths. It deals with a runaway synth, kind of like Harkness in Fallout 3. And so because of Fallout 4, I was able to kind of explore different things like that, and even make references to like Boston and the Institute and things like that. And of course, I've had a million people tell me, please find a way to bring Nick Valentine onto the show because it fits too well. And I would love to do that if I knew if I knew how to get a hold of the voice actor. But for instance, episode 1 of the time or of the series where they actually enter New Vegas, it starts off with Walter listening very intently to the Silver Shroud before they have to go and pick up a case. And it's just kind of funny because if I had released the series earlier, I wouldn't have had the knowledge to produce episodes like that. And even now, as new worlds keep getting open in the Fallout universe, like Appalachia and Boston, I get a lot of requests, and I even brainstorm ideas to how can I somehow maybe bring Walter and Bunny to those places and somehow explore the story there in their own timeline. So yeah, it just opens a lot of possibilities, and we've even had an entire episode dedicated to the Silver Shroud that was written by my friend Joshua Belmonte, and he kind of made a Batman-inspired Silver Shroud episode. So 4 and all the new characters and little subcultures it's brought in has really just helped feed the show with new content, even though they are so far away from each other.
It was, I believe, what was it? I want to say 3. I want to say, for the sake of argument, 3 seasons. The story of Once Upon a Wasteland, I believe, as like fully properly wrapped up, and it was 3 seasons long. It was more so a concluded story, a clear beginning and a clear ending. And maybe not like a crystal clear, but like in general. But to that point, we've seen it with certain stories, in just like any genre, mostly in like, movies and TV shows, but we also see it with like, games and books and like other such things. There's sort of not two different types, but 2 different categories, or maybe not categories, but evolutions of stories. There's stories that can continue to evolve and, expand and, add new things and explore new stories and explore new characters and this, that, and the other thing. And then there's set stories. There's stories that are written to have a beginning and an end, and that's it. That's the entire story. That's the narrative exploration. That's the breadth of that specific creation. To that extent, does the story of Once Upon a Wasteland have or sorry, not Once Upon a Wasteland. Does this other podcast? Does the story of True Vault Escapades have a definitive ending? Does it have like a beginning, middle, and end to the entire broad story arc, or is it set along sort of a like we were sort of talking about, sort of like a living adventure kind of thing? These characters go out and they go on their adventures, and what was the term for like monster of the week, what is it, like Power Rangers and stuff, where there's like always a different monster, always a different adventure to go on, this, that, and the other thing. What sort of story, like story arc, story conclusion, do you have in mind with True Vault Escapades?
Well, it's so funny because in a way it can work. It can work both ways, and what I mean by that is, like I explained earlier, I created this overarching storyline that was kind of looming over the entire series that hasn't been addressed since the first part, which was the whole Enclave connection. Like, the Enclave is actively searching for Walter and Bunny, since they basically have a piece of tech that they own. But for years, I have just kept them in New Vegas, and they're doing their own thing, and they're creating their own stories, and being introduced to all these characters. And there's very little reference to that overarching story. But recently, and I do mean very recently, I actually started to have that sort of house of cards start tumbling down on them, because I felt it was high time it was addressed again, because all I'd really done is kind of poked at the original story, which again hasn't been really addressed in any sense of the word. But now we are at the end. We finished season 6 recently, which has now fully brought the whole story from the beginning to the forefront of Walter and Bunny. And now with this upcoming season we have planned, it's going to basically it's going to be completely aimed at how this story concludes with the detectives and the Enclave. But that being said, I mean, I picture the series, even when that happens, I can still see it going on indefinitely, because like we said, it's based off of old time radio shows, which they themselves, they just kept going and going and going until like the network didn't want to pick them up again. And so even when they finish this, I guess you could say, main storyline, who's to say there's not another one on the horizon? Or perhaps we can just keep doing the case of this, the case of that, the case of whatever, and we can just have a new thing brought to the table for the detectives long after this is over. Because just like old radio shows, they would last forever, just because the writers had new ideas for it. So in my mind, I can't know what I'll do with my time if I end the show right now, at least, because I write like crazy. I write when I was doing the panel and Good Springs for the Fallout fan celebration. I was asked about that, and I'm like, I can just write like second nature, and I have a ton of ideas for it in the future. So we'll solve that problem. But who's to say we can't just add 100 more episodes and counting after that?
That's true. Yeah. Because I mean, like, that's like the secret third, like that's the secret third category, like the stories that have like, a definitive beginning and ending, but then like later, maybe not later, but like eventually, like they see how much, traction they're getting. Like, hey, let's tell some extra stories. Let's keep telling like more stories. And I think from I guess in this specific instance, the most appropriate word would be, well, actually, to play devil's advocate, rather. That's a little bit more appropriate summation. To play devil's advocate, like what about like the possibility of like, because like you can do that, right? You can have a story that has a beginning, a middle, an ending, and then like that's it. And then you can, if there's more stuff to be told, you can do that. But then like what to that extent, what sort of like fear or concern do you have of the, I guess the story more so like overstaying its welcome in a sense, because like you said, the like some stories are just so insulated that they can just kind of like go on forever. Comic books are a great example of that. Like
Exactly.
like Batman and Superman are like, Superman's what, 80 years old, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, 80 plus.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
And like, you know, those kinds of comic books are really interesting because they can, you know, sort of like, you know, different stories done by different writers, different authors, different, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And then you have like singularly controlled universes that just kind of go on like forever, like, you know, One Piece, Game of Thrones, I was gonna say Star Wars, but yeah, that's no longer applicable. But yeah, stories that are just like continuously developed because maybe like the author had like this original grand idea that like, you know, expanded like years, decades, this, that, and the other thing. But then, you know, not everybody maps stuff out to that nth degree. But to the question, what sort of concern or worry do you have about like if you go in that approach of like having a finale, quote unquote, but then also being able to like, you know, sort of do more with it? What do you sort of like do to insulate like stagnation or like, you know, disinterest from the audience?
When I do that, because like I will have like maybe a more special episode for Walter and Bunny than the usual formula sometimes. But recently, I started exploring this little side project called Escapade Extras, which goes into completely unrelated stories that they span across any sort of time period in the Fallout world. Like for instance, we had Kenneth Bigu from Chad. He starred in our first detour into Fallout 76, which it took place in Clancy Manor, which is that Mothman cultist infested place, and it tells the story of how that house became the way it is when you find it in game. And we've had another one that was like a parody episode of the detectives in the first 5 episodes of the series, just like this really overblown Naked Gun style situation. And then the biggest thing we did to refresh everything was introduce its very first spinoff, which was called the Cage Chronicles, that follows a ex-Brotherhood Knight who was one of the lone survivors of his squad that was taken out by ghouls, and he's basically become a mercenary, and he takes this mysterious job from this woman, and he's being sent across the United States on this journey for this mysterious target. And we're definitely continuing with Cage. So basically, instead of like just completely switching up the main duo, Walter and Bunny, what we usually will do is we will take detours and then circle back and then stay there for a bit and then take another detour in a different direction, just so it's not like all consistently one story, same characters every single time. Because even I get kind of bored of that sometimes. So, and you know, Fallout is such a big world, so there's so many extra things to explore. So we're really starting to embrace a lot of extra ideas that we can throw in, so it's not just the usual formula that we're used to.
Yeah, because there's shows that I've seen before that sort of like focus on one character as like the primary primary protagonist, and then after like, you know, X number of seasons or years, they switch on to a different character as sort of like, you know, again the new main protagonist to tell stories about them and like what they got going on, stuff like that. And it's, you know, stuff like that is always, I think, interesting in sort of a narrative driven experience, especially if it's a character that was like originally close to the main character or the main cast. That, you know, to avoid sort of like talking about the, you know, like the Cleveland shows and stuff out there where it's like, here's, a new story about a character that like maybe you kind of cared about. Now here's a spinoff, and it's like, okay, cool, thanks. And yeah, I think that is a good strategy for in a sense, like keeping the story, not just the story of like the characters, but the story of like the narrative itself interesting and dynamic in a sense. And I think beyond that, especially as we've seen, again, you started with the inspiration from Fallout 3, and then Fallout New Vegas came in, and you took inspiration from that, and you did the same with Fallout 4. And it's like, as these stories, or like as the universe, as the Fallout world continues to expand and get bigger and more filled with stuff and things and goings on, in a sense, there's more, there's always more stuff to draw on. There's always more things to reference and to talk about and to be inspired by. And I think, maybe not more so specifically, but to that point, as we've seen, like, Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, and more so recently Fallout Prime, the evolution of the universe, how has that, just the constant changing, how has that been something that you've adapted to, and something that you've utilized as maybe not so much a narrative tool, but something to help further craft and refine the stories that you are trying to tell?
I kind of picture it like with the introduction of new things, big and small, not just like lore changes, but introductions to new weapons, new mutants, new concepts and characters and factions like that. They will often inspire like new ideas, even if it's not like the mainstay of an episode. Like, for instance, the Institute episode, where the Institute was the big bad of that episode. And sometimes I'll include different types of like enemies that we wouldn't have seen in the Mojave because they weren't invented yet, and just sort of taking in a lot of this new stuff. Sometimes I feel like I'm stranded when I'm making these, because obviously Walter and Bunny are not time travelers. They're stuck in the Mojave in 2281. And I can only do so much in terms of like implementing new things, but I will often try to like look through a lot of the new things introduced in 4 and 76 with like a fine-tooth comb and be like, okay, can this exist here? Can this be implemented into the world without breaking lore? And I think one of those instances was the case of the martyred Mothman, which was a episode where I literally bring the Mothman from Fallout 76 down to the Mojave because a sect of the Mothman cult actually went away from Appalachia, and they order a Mothman by this shady group to be delivered to them so they could worship it, and it starts raining terror on Freeside and Hoover Dam, and Walter and Bunny have to team up with the NCR to stop it. So it's like, I can, even if it's super far away and seemingly impossible, I'll try to take like a little bite of new lore and new implementations by Bethesda and just like see if I can just slide it in there real quick, even though it can't stay there. I can at least get a little bite-sized piece of something if it's lore friendly, and then just like let it run free and make a whole idea off of it. Obviously, you can't do that for you can't imagine that for like the courier and stuff, because that stuff didn't happen in the game. But it's like, hey, somewhere in this wasteland at this time, Walter and Bunny were dealing with this. It was just off screen somewhere, and that's kind of how I make it work.
Yeah, and I think that point specifically, the sort of like that, it's interesting that you had that whole storyline with the Mothman. because it leans more into the, the supernatural side of Fallout. I think most fans would recognize Fallout as having a lot of, supernatural elements about it, but I don't think many people like maybe not immediately, but like a lot of people forget about the more like, actual like supernatural, but like, I mean, I guess everybody knows about aliens and stuff like that. And like, in a sense, like Dunwich and stuff, but we don't see as many stories revolving around those things besides, like like every time Dunwich comes up. But again, to speak to that specifically, like there is that sort of like, larger sort of supernatural presence to the world that very similar to how you utilize some of the more fantastical elements do sort of like, peek in every once in a while to those elements. Have you like considered working with any sort of like stories that sort of like deal with like Dunwich or like the Psychers or again like some of these more like mythology based creatures like the Mothman, the Snallygaster, anything, maybe not those characters specifically, but obviously something that's a little bit more localized to where the story is taking place.
Yeah, the craziest I think I've explored beyond the Mothman was I think this episode came out in 2017. It's called The Case of the Martian's Courier, and it's completely delves into the whole Zetan alien thing that Fallout has always had going on. And I literally have Walter and Bunny get abducted by aliens and probed on and stuff like that. And I make this whole separate lore thing where there's like a intergalactic conflict between the Zetans, which we're used to, and the Greys, which I guess have been documented throughout history. And the Greys are like the good guys, and the Zetans are like just power hungry. And the reason that the Greys are abducting them is because they did not know that this package they were delivering to the NCR was actually containing like a thermonuclear device, and the Greys were trying to protect humanity, whereas the Zetans were trying to get a hold of it. And this is, and that's kind of that's probably the most outlandish episode I've explored. But what's funny is that I've been talking with my co-writer Joshua Belmonte and a couple other people about season 8, which will come after this upcoming season, and we're thinking about just delving into just the more fantastical things in general and just leaning into that more. Like we had the pint-sized slasher. I'm surprised I never got into that, and I have had a lot of Dunwich requests by people over the years. Like, I'm surprised you never got into the Dunwich building and the whole conspiracy around that. And I'm like, I don't know why I haven't done that yet, but that's the exact kind of stuff I'm hoping to portray in the future, because we'll have done this. We would have finally solved this overarching story I mentioned earlier, and now we'll have like a lot of free time to explore crazy, more cryptids and maybe even paranormal stuff in the series. But yeah, we've dipped our toe in it just a little bit, just definitely not full on, but we hope to change that.
Is that like to the question specifically, like what's one story that you've always wanted to like, write out and like include in the podcast that you just like haven't been able to, create in a way that, feels like it's fully lived up to what you imagine it is. You haven't been able to something that you haven't been able to like actually work into the narrative, or is it mostly that? Is it like the like the Dunwich and like some of the other things?
Yeah, when it comes to the crazy mythological stuff, I definitely want to include cryptids in general, all the cryptids we get from 76. Like, I was imagining how like maybe we can have an episode completely dedicated to the sheep squatch, and then another one to the Grafton monster and something like that. I have, in terms of just regular ideas, I've wanted to maybe. I mean, I'm always so specific about drifting too close to lore, but sometimes I've wanted to like bring in the courier in some shape or form, since this is all happening at the same time as the events of Fallout New Vegas. It's like, why not have like a really ambiguous meetup or run in with the courier? And because I mean, it kind of feels like it's high time that happened in some shape or form, but I just have to be very careful because it's kind of like Fallout on Prime. They sort of allude to the courier, like at Mr. House at least, but doesn't exactly say what he or she did, and leaves it completely ambiguous, like I said. So that is something I would like to include, that I have kind of ping ponged through the years. I just don't know how to include that. But other than that, like I said, the silly and fantastical, I'm more than happy to include as soon as possible, actually. So more cryptids, please.
Since you brought it up, let's talk about Fallout Prime, because I feel like the general consensus on the show, as a non-game expansion of the lore and the universe itself, I feel like the community overall has reacted positively to it. I don't think it's, the greatest thing ever written, but I think as far as video game adaptations, it's a really strong show. And I think for 90, like 95, 96, maybe a little higher percentage of the time, it remains pretty like lore friendly and lore accurate. Even if we cut out, the in my opinion, more innocuous decisions, like, the Dinky the dinosaurs pointing the wrong way and this, that, and the other thing. The story itself and the world that it is built within the confines of the TV show, as it reflects to the larger medium. What has been your reaction to it? Where do you stand on this sliding scale of worst thing ever and greatest masterpiece of all time?
I am part of that large percent that actually loves the show. I made sure to like check in with myself as such a old Fallout fan to not be like overly critical of it, because there is a lot of stuff that they got to cover if they so choose, because it's like they're telling an original story, but they are they're still going to be inserting themselves into the lore, into familiar locations. So it's like, ooh, I wonder how they're going to portray this or deal with this. And I think they're doing an incredible job with it, because you can clearly tell they're not trying to have a completely canon ending, at least with New Vegas. And we're still seeing all these iconic locations and sometimes characters. And I'm pretty sure a lot of us out there are familiar with like Hollywood video game adaptations, and they usually end up sucking really bad. Like sometimes they're not even like arguably good. It's like sometimes it's like they completely lost the plot, like they never played the games, or minds behind the games don't have a thing to do with it. I didn't see that. No, I'm afraid to watch it. I probably won't, just for my insanity. But I was really confident to see Todd Howard and like Mr. Nolan, who put together like Westworld and all these other shows behind it. And you can tell like from the beginning that they were really, really doing their best to make this as like true to the source material as they possibly could, all the while telling their own story and adding on to the lore. I mean, every time I watch it, it's just like, it's amazing to me. And I get so disappointed when it's over, because it's like, I want more. And I can't speak for everyone there, but I mean, especially season 2, which rocked in my opinion. It was just amazing. And I was like, really? The only thing I see people complaining about so far is where Dinky is standing. I don't care about that. Dinky is there, and that is what matters to me.
Right.
And, yeah, and I like how we are like getting a retelling because that's kind of the player's job since this is a video game show. And I think that you can tell there are people that really care about Fallout making this show. And I think they've done an incredible job. I think they are carrying a lot of subplots. They should probably narrow those down because I would like to see some more time spent in less stories, I guess. But even then, it's like that's nowhere near a deal killer for me. They're doing incredible. So it's a big like a solid A for the Fallout show for me.
Perhaps not the thing that like really sold me on like, oh, these guys, like the writers, like they know ball. But like like a really, really impressive, reference. So you remember spoilers. I get spoilers. By the time this episode comes out, it's going to be like 4 months after the second season is wrapped up. So spoilers. Sorry. During the scene where Cooper Howard meets with Mr. House pre-war, and they're talking and everything. What was it? Oh gosh, I can't remember the date and time that he spat out. Where like, oh, my computer says that like this date and time, it's like that marks like the end of the world or something like that. The date and time I think was like 12 minutes. The point is, it was a reference to. You remember in Fallout 3's Operation or no oh geez, what is it? The last DLC they did where you go to Adams Air Force Base.
Broken Steel.
Broken Steel, that's it. So you do the Broken Steel DLC. You need to get to Adams Air Force Base, but you can't get to Adams Air Force Base because you got to go into the tunnels and start up the presidential metro line that just whisks the president away. In order to do that, you need to activate a computer system named, I believe, oh geez, what was it?
Oh, the AI lady.
Yeah. I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
She had like an acronym name or something like that. The time that Mr. House says, tells Cooper Howard is like 9 minutes, 9 minutes, something like that. After this computer system was booted on for the first time.
Wait, there's a correlation with that date that Mr. Howard said to the AI that was last activated.
Because the entire time Mr. House is like, oh, who's like the third player on the board? Like, I don't know who could it be? Who could it be? And all that stuff. But we as the audience member, or at least, audience members who like are that deep in the lore, know that the date and time that he references in that dialogue exchange,
right,
is a reference to very shortly after that AI system was booted on for the first time. And we know that AI system was designed by the Enclave.
Right.
So
I guess we all guessed it was the Enclave.
Right.
Fine.
It's always the Enclave. But it was a very sort of like, it was a very subtle hint to a very, maybe not innocuous, but a very lesser known bit of the lore. Maybe not even lesser known, but like lesser referenced, right? But they were able to take that bit of information and utilize it in the story. Probably not, the biggest accomplishment ever, but it just, to me anyway, that just showed how much they were actually like paying attention and studying the lore and like, the characters and factions involved in the universe to be able to make that kind of a reference in the first place. That's impressive.
Yeah, it goes to show that they're really paying attention, and I don't know what kind of like how many people they have on deck to go through that process because it's like all of the little terminal entries and all of the dates throughout all of the games they've made. It's like how did they come about choosing that? Like, did they bookmark that for later? Because it's like I think I would have forgotten about that by the time the show was being made. But
Right.
it just goes to show you they just, I mean, like I think Todd Howard said it, or someone behind the show said it. I mean, they are tying what's happening in the Fallout show into what's going to happen in Fallout 5. So I'm sure they're also going to be, paying really close attention to little details like that for whatever the next setup is going to be. But yeah, that does show like a crap tons of dedication to the story, to the lore, to the series. So you can connect it to just like any other game, except the medium's different this time.
Yeah. And I think that's, to me anyway, that's a sign of a really strong and really dedicated writing team, because they're able to make those sorts of, like, they're able to reference and also write in such a way that so deeply connects to different elements in the franchise. Like, for, to speak specifically to that scene again, the reference was a very subtle nod to the Enclave, and the entire scene is how all like, well, like, who is it? Why is this date and time, important and stuff like that? Who's this mysterious third player on the board here? Like, what's going on? Where, again, if you know the reference, you already know, like, hey, this is what that is. But then I guess if you know that, then you already, since like, episode 4, season 1, have been guessed like, oh, it's the Enclave. It's already Enclave. We know.
I'm sure that was a lot of our thoughts when we saw that famous meeting scene at the season finale, season 1. We saw that mysterious guy up in that glass pane, that window that was looking down at everybody, and he was clearly speaking to Barb about what to say. And I'm sure a lot of us were like, "Enclave, Enclave!"
Right?
But
Like, oh my god,
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, but
oh,
they're always there,
every single time. It's always the Enclave. It's always the
like
Enclave.
roaches.
To that as well. Again, because like, I feel like more so recently, gaming has just become like more, not contentious, but more opened up to criticism in a sense. And I think there's a lot of reasons for people to be critical. Changes in the, maybe the perceived standard of like, writing, design, creative interpretations in the industry, change, like economic changes, societal changes, technological changes, like we've seen with the fucking AI over a very, very recent time period, as of the recording of this episode. But there's a lot of energy coming from a lot of different places, a lot of them valid, and just as many, perhaps less so in a sense. But as somebody who's been a part of the franchise for so long, or the fandom rather, how have you sort of seen the fandom, like, shift and change the general tone and general vibe, the kind of criticisms that have been, levied against Bethesda and, like, gaming in general and stuff like that? How have you sort of seen that sort of, again, change and evolve and morph and shape as, like, new games come out, new mediums come out, and just as the universe has expanded and artistically has been taken in a very different direction than the original couple of games?
It's funny because I saw that shift. My whole thing, my whole medium on social media with Fallout spans back to 2013 before the release of Fallout 4, so we had a little bit of time before Fallout 4 came, and so we were just playing three in New Vegas, just about for a couple of years. And it's crazy because it felt like Fallout's community was a lot more like a small town. And then when Fallout 4 hit and really launched it into the mainstream, I started seeing it grow like a freaking metropolis, and that was great. And it's funny how I've seen it flow. A lot of new fans coming in, never heard of the series, and they're going back playing the older games and stuff. I've noticed, I don't know, I've noticed in recent years, it feels like the gaming community at large can get hypercritical over very small things. I've noticed now I'm critical about certain things as well, and then Fallout even, but like I don't know. I feel like it's kind of become a trend to be somewhat of a pessimist in a way, and instead of like looking like truly having an opinion of your own, and that's you can. It's just that I see. I see a lot of good, of course. I think I've had mostly positive, absolutely positive experiences in the Fallout community, hands down. I meet people all the time on the internet about it, but I do notice that there are people out there. I mean, they just hate Bethesda, and they love Fallout, and they still hate Bethesda, and that's cool. But it's just um, I just see a lot of nitpickiness, if that makes any sense, and it gets it sometimes I'll see it and it gets really just like it's like a drag when I see it. I'll go in like comment sections for Fallout 76. I'm sure we've all seen Fallout 76 comment sections, and it'll be like Fallout fans just screaming Fallout 5, and oh, I don't want to see this, or it's that meme of that guy opening the fridge and he gets super disappointed.
Oh yeah.
but yeah, and it's like sure, Fallout 76 is not it's not my favorite. I really enjoy it, and I think they've really improved. And I think that's the difference between people like me and perhaps people like them. It's like, yeah, I played the game in the beta when it came out, and I was so disappointed in it. It felt like a dead game. It was choppy. Everything was bad. And then when Wastelanders came out, and then these other subsequent updates came out, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like a completely new game. And I think there's a lot of people that get stuck with that first impression, and then they just roll with it. They don't even give it a chance. They kind of mold their personality around like, this game sucked when I first played it. It sucks forever. At least that's what I've noticed. But I mean, if I just had to give a collective opinion on the Fallout community and just most of the gaming communities I've been around, it's been overwhelmingly positive. Very, very little negativity. And I know it's very prevalent in a lot of other spaces, but at least in Fallout, I've felt a very particular uniqueness in this community that I really cannot compare to another. And it's crazy when you're in there long enough, as big as it is, like we were talking about before, you run into people that like over and over again because it's just really that tight knit. And yeah, that's more or less my stance on it. And despite my own uh, criticisms, it's nothing so far has ever been a true deal breaker for me.
Have you seen like something similar in the podcasting sphere? I guess technically the radio drama sphere, to be Shakespearean about it. But I heard a statistic recently that said that like, maybe not a statistic, but like one of those like interesting bits of information that like podcasting has like had a severe decrease lately. Like not as many people are like starting podcasts, and more podcasts are like coming to an end for various reasons. I think the one chiefly among them is like a lot of them are starting to get like bought up and controlled by like larger and larger entities, and just the Netflixification of a lot of these podcasts. Like they start trimming the weeds, and then like, oh, you only get like 3 seasons of this, and then like you're done. this, that, and the other thing. But when it comes to like, more so, well, as it reflects to like, a lot of additional like, criticisms, growing pains, this, that, and the other thing in the in the gaming sphere, in the Fallout sphere specifically. Have you seen have you seen something similar happening in the niche genre of the community that you are a bigger part of?
As in like getting bought out or just ending? Or
I guess more so the general question is like, what's the current like tone and vibe of the audio drama, the podcasting sphere, and how is it sort of like changed and evolved over, let's say the last like 5 years or so, to sort of correlate it with a lot of the growing criticism that we've seen in the gaming sphere,
like the traditional podcasting space.
Yeah.
I for our niche, I think our niche has benefited particularly just in our own. I feel like right now, at least, we're in a safe little pocket because, and I will attribute a lot of our current listenership, which has been really well, to the Fallout show and just how popular it's gotten. I remember me and some of the other folks in the network were talking when the first season came out, and we're like, "Did you guys notice a significant spike in your listens?" And it's like, yeah. And then the second season came out, and it was even better. So it just kind of affirmed that. And I believe a report came out recently that like 83 million people watch the Fallout show, which of course feeds projects like ours into the general algorithm, and that really helps. And I don't know if it's comparable to like the traditional podcast because we're kind of doing. I mean, I know it's a podcast by definition, but it's like we're doing radio theater, and I don't know how many. I mean, I'm sure there's a big world of it out there. I don't know if it can be counted the same as like kind of a roundtable traditional podcast, but I have to say, I mean, the show has been out since 2016, and I've noticed since about 2020 and upward, it's really only grown in number. I'm getting more people these days saying like they are starting the podcast for the first time than I've ever seen, at least. And I'm sure the same is reflected for my colleagues, but um, it's kind of like it's kind of like with the radio play thing. Like I said, you can just keep it going and trying new things and seeing what works. It's kind of like how we're, the Modus Files, one of my favorites. They are doing the Ballad of Trader Red, which is their first spinoff after they have closed the initial story. I'm actually part of the Ballad of Trader Red, by the way. It's a great show. Go listen to it. But yeah, I've always felt that this little pocket here has been so unique in its own way that, like, I think as long as Fallout continues to be made and exists, I feel like we'll always have like a new influx, or a bigger influx of new people curious about this little format of ours.
When it comes to like other, because you've talked about how you run other maybe not currently, but also have been involved in other non Fallout related audio drama projects, to that extent, and to more so your experience with True Vault Escapades. Have you like considered branching out into any other sort of audio drama or like narrative stories like that in other sort of Bethesda games, other games in generals? Is there going to be like what is it? What would it be? True Starborn Escapades? Is there going to be any sort of narratives revolving around like the Dragonborn or the Hero of Kvatch or anything like that? Like, have you thought about expanding into any other things, or are you in like a a good and comfortable groove with True Vault Escapades.
It's funny because what you just said, I basically did all of that minus the Dragonborn thing. Well, for one, I have a separate podcast. It's only 2 episodes. It's 2 movie-length episodes, about 2.5 hours long each one. It's called BioShock: The Midnight Series because I'm also a massive BioShock fan, and doesn't sound anything like the vintage radio format. It's very much like a modern, just gritty BioShock show. So I have those, and I've also done even a couple of crossovers into True Vault Escapades, and I think, arguably one of the most popular episodes that we put out was the Watery Grave case, which, again, was a Bioshock crossover episode with the characters of True Vault Escapades in them, actually interacting with the people and characters in Bioshock in its own unique story. And it's kind of funny. The Midnight series that I mentioned, I actually incorporate some of that narrative into the Watery Grave case crossover. And now, even as we speak, we are about to close out our second crossover special, which is Star Wars, of all things, where we incorporate Fallout and Star Wars and our characters into this big crossover, just to kind of, like I said, keep things fresh. And even then, I have written a Starfield script for the what is it? It's the Tales. It's a Starfield podcast that Kenneth Vigue from Chad put together. The Frontier Stories from Starfield. That one's yet to be put out yet, but I have written and cast that for the future. God, I'm scared to check how many pages. I think it's like 325 pages worth of a Red Dead Redemption audio drama that I wrote all the way back in like 2020. and I could not find, at least now, I haven't been able to find good enough impersonators for like Arthur Morgan and Dutch and Sean and everybody. So that one's in the back burner. So yes, I have explored and continuing to explore different worlds. And yeah, they're usually around games that I've created or I've had such a close affinity with, like Fallout, like Bioshock. I mean, what's next? Maybe LA Noir, Mafia, something like that. So yeah, True Vault is not the only thing I have in the chamber, and people have been asking me recently to make another sequel to the Bioshock Midnight series. So perhaps that'll be my next little adventure.
As we've sort of touched on with just sort of like the state of it's more than like just gaming. It's just like media in general. It feels like there's part of it is always just sort of like the natural rejection of like very clearly like corporate driven I was going to say monetization practices, but that's not it. But like, stuff that's very clearly put out to be, consumed, the reality show content of like the modern era, which is really funny because there's still reality show TV stuff. But like that sort of thing, like that's something that, people are always going to criticize, like, oh, like it's the like it's the Lay's potato chips of content. It's easy to consume, not very, rich and fulfilling, but like, goddamn, there's a lot of it. And so like, people have valid criticisms based on that. They have other criticisms based on like we talked about before, story direction, the kinds of stories that are told, changing from like what the original style or context of the stories were, this, that, and the other thing. And like, again, it's something that's just beyond like any specific medium or franchise or genre or anything like that. It's just sort of like the larger metascape that we live in right now, but for you, when in sort of like your own best practices, how do you how do you navigate such like a minefield, especially as a content creator, putting stories out there, being active on various different platforms and in various different circles, and this, that, and the other thing. How do you go about navigating those sorts of situations in a way that you take in bits and pieces of the valid criticism and sort of try to sort of like compartmentalize that and like continue moving forward, and like the optimistic outlook on the whole going forward stuff, like in other words, what sort of advice would you give to people who are trying to navigate the current time that we live in, as far as it relates to media consumption, in a way that is like meaningful, positive, and I guess I had like a third word there, fulfilling in a sense, consuming in a way that is worth not just our time, but the audience's time as well, and then giving criticism that is meaningful in a sense that it actually has a valid conversation to bring to the table.
From the perspective of someone who is creating something of their own, I think like the biggest foundational building block is to be quite literally like passionate about it, because like I I produced the show with a very, very clear vision, and that's not to say I was going to be just like standing there like a rock, not taking any criticism and applying it. I mean, for instance, one thing that I noticed that I must have done well was establish who these characters were, because there actually was a time when I got some criticism for how Bunny was being portrayed in the earlier parts of the series. So when I had those first 5 episodes, Bunny kind of came off as like this tough badass who was really quick with a gun. And then when I moved them to New Vegas, she kind of devolved into a slight damsel in distress, and she wasn't really carrying those attributes anymore. And what's funny, I didn't even notice that until people pointed that out, and then I put her back on track how she originally was as the tough badass, and people started to notice that and was like, oh, okay, the original Bunny is back. So I guess in the lesson in that is to stay absolutely true to what you're creating. Try not to lose your way there. And but yeah, in terms of criticism, I take it all in. I'll even take in absolute insults, the very few that I've gotten, and even just kind of think on it. Is there any truth in what that person just said? But it, it's I try not to please the audience, if that makes any sense. I try to create exactly what the picture was in my head, and then just seeing what comes of that. I'm not trying to like be a people pleaser with the creation that I'm making. It's like, okay, I had this vision, and just like an artist wants to paint something that popped in their head, and that's exactly what they're going to put on the canvas. And that's kind of what True Vault Escapades is a, a like a compared to. It's just like, this is exactly how I pictured it. It doesn't mean it's incapable of tweaks here and there, but for the new folks, or for any folks that would want to create something, or and it doesn't have to be an audio drama. It's just like, you know, try not to overthink it, and just stay very, very laser like focused to the initial vision. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay, fun fact: we had a few guest stars on the show that some folks might recognize. I felt like I should throw this in. Speaking of the previous Fallout 4 question, or the Fallout 4 and just new Fallout content in general, and how that's affected the show. I think one of our most notable guest stars on the show was Ryan Alosio, who plays Deacon, the
Ooh.
companion from the railroad. He's in the show briefly. I thought that was pretty cool. And we've had the late Jason Dameron, who played the storyteller from Fallout lore on Shoddycast.
Mhm.
He was a huge mainstay on the show. He was the Vault 54 overseer. He was Mr. Casket, basically the Joker of our show, who keeps coming back. And he also played Lieutenant Humphreys, who was that that NCR lieutenant that helps the detectives a lot. And Zach Finfrock from Nuka Break, he recently drew the cover art for the Kenneth McGee episode, the I Married a Mothman Cultist.
Love him.
And one more. We had Lane Compton. If anyone's familiar with the Mafia series, he plays John Donovan, Lincoln Clay's friend from Mafia 3. He plays a huge character in our first Halloween special. So this it's kind of like a little seasoning a few plugs there, but that's about it for me.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Preston Hardin, creator of True Vault Escapades, a Fallout audio drama. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow to be notified of future episodes, and consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to new uploads to help keep episodes ad-free and to improve the quality and frequency of transmission. Until next time, dear listener, I thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.